Hello everybody, Hussein here. Today you're going to learn how to create a backend server in Flask library. So you're going to learn how to get started with the Flask technology in Python. To be specific, you're going to learn how to handle, for example, GET requests. You're going to learn how to get involved with POST requests, and we're also going to learn how to render simple templates in Flask. For example, if I go here, I go to my localhost server and then I write, for example, my name. This is an example of a dynamic URL, by the way, which you're going to learn later. Or I don't know, Alice maybe. Yeah. And everything working here. So you're going to learn how to do all of this in this video. So first things first, what is a backend server? So a backend server, for example, let's say I have my front end, which can be anything that the client is using. It can be a website, it can be an app. And so what the client is going to do, or the front end is going to send a request to the backend. It's going to say, please, for example, please send me an image of ID, let's say 200. Okay. And then the backend is going to search. The backend is going to do all of its processing and stuff, and then it's going to return a response. So when it returns a response, it can send anything. It can be an image, again it can be text, or any other resource. So in this example, let's say it returned an image, and then along with the resource it also returns something called a status code. So it can be 404, which means nothing was found, or it can send a 200, which means the status was okay. So that's what backend services are. So now let's write some code. Environment. First things first, since it's a Python environment, we need to create a new one. So conda create -n. Now we have to specify the name of our environment. So in this case, for this video, I'm going to do conda create -n flask tutorial. So now I have created my environment. So now all that's left for me is to activate it. So I'm going to activate it now. I've activated it. So now, since we need to create a Flask environment, or we need to create a Flask app, I need to install the Flask package. So as before, as a little refresher, I'm just gonna install a package by saying conda install, and then the package name, which in this case is Flask. Awesome. So now this part is done. Now let's actually write some code. To do so, what you do is we need to create an empty Python file, and I'm gonna do a touch main.py. So now I have my main Python file. This will be the starting point of my backend server, and then I'm gonna clear to give me some space, and then so now let's write some code here. So first things first, I'm gonna import my Flask package. So from Flask import Flask, and then so now I have imported the Flask class. Now I need to create an instance of this class. So I'm going to say app. So an app variable equals to Flask, and then name. Okay. So now I've created a little. So now basically I've initialized the app, and now let's create an empty route. Okay. So you're gonna see what I mean by route in a bit. So if I do so the symbol, and then app.route. So I'm gonna say if the user goes to this route, which is the index directory, so basically an empty slash, or the home directory, which is what's normally called. And then then I'm saying here, if the user goes to the slash directory, they want to run this function. So now let's create our function. So here I'm going to call it hello world. So hello world, and then I'm gonna return a response. So if the user goes to slash, and they're gonna get this response. So I'm gonna return a JSON object. Hello world. Okay. So that's the very bare bones version of how Flask works. So now let's run it. So what I need to do is call Flask and then dash dash app, which means I want to run the main.py file. So I'm gonna specify main.py here and then give it the run command. So I want to run this app. Awesome. So now it's running. It's telling me that it's running on port 5000. So what I need you to do is to open your API client, and then in your API client you can run it here 5000 and then the slash, which means it's at the home directory and I'm at localhost, just like it. So then it's gonna run. So you can see it's returning me a message. And then let's say I want to change it. I want to make a little change to the server. And then let's save and then let's run it again. Yeah, but as you can see here, the change has not been deployed. So I think we need to do this. We need to deploy again. So as you can see, now it's being deployed. But now let's say if what if I wanted to change it again? And then let's run it again. However, as you can see, it's not been deployed. So there's a way to save time here. What I'm going to do again is I'm going to run the same command. However, this time I'm going to send a separate flag called dash dash debug. So it turns on the debugger and it basically tells Python that whenever you see a change in my code, I want you to redeploy again. So for example here, hello world, and then if I do goodbye world again, it should redeploy. Awesome. So now it's running. Other than JSON objects, you can also return HTML. So for example here, if I can do h1 hello world again here, h1, yes, it's now running. Now let's save and then it's now running. And then let's do it. So as you can see, it is now sending me h1 tags, and if I go here onto my localhost in the browser, you can see that it is returning me actual HTML. Okay, so now let's look at other routes. For example, let's say instead of the index route, they want to go, for example, to the names route. Okay, to handle this names route, it's really simple. Again, I'm going to do app.route. In this parameter, I'm going to specify my route again. I'm going to say names, and then I'm going to specify what function to run it. So of course, names here again, and then return message. And then since this is JSON object, we are in the names directory, and then it should run. And then since we are now going to the names directory, let's see if it runs. Awesome. So it's running. Now there is also a way in Python or in Flask where we can add variables in the URL, or like make the URL dynamic. What do I mean by that? For example, let's say if the user is in names slash and then like any other resource. For example, let's say he wants to go to this resource, or he wants to go to this resource, or like any other resource, then we can use something called variables in a URL, and you're gonna understand this better when I show it to you. So for example, let's say I want to go to the ID. Okay, so let's handle ID here. So of course I'm going to do app.route, and then I'm going to specify my route here, so slash, and then this is what's going to be different. I use these brackets, the more than and the less than brackets, to specify, to tell Python that I'm going to use a variable here. So in this case it's going to be ID, and then def again, and then yeah, this function handle ID, So now this is where things get a little bit different. So now that I have an ID variable, I'm gonna pass it here as well, ID. Okay, so now that I have ID here, I'm gonna say return and then my response message in the IDs directory. So let's run it. Let's see if it all works. So since ID is a variable, we can specifically, for example, if I want to go to 200 in the IDs directory, or since this is a variable, I can change it 400. It runs again. Awesome. Or 1000. It runs again. Now, how do we display this? How do I go ahead and display ID onto the server or onto the front end? So to do this, what we do is return and then the F keyword, and then the ID. This will be my message. The ID that was entered was, and then two curly brackets to tell it that I want to render a variable onto the front end, or send the front end, send the ID to the front end. Sorry, ID was ID, and then should run now. Awesome. See, so now it runs 1000, or I can do 200 again, or I can do 5000. And one better way to do this is not why this is to use something called a markup safe. Okay, so let's use from markup safe. So from the markup safe package, I have to import escape. So why am I doing this? So for example, let's say in the URL, let's say if the user does something like this script and then he writes some malicious code, okay, malicious code, and then he runs it. Of course, it's not gonna run here, but in the front end, in the back end, if they try to run it, if the hacker tried to run it, it would execute malicious code onto the server. So basically, the escape function prevents that. So now, since we have escape, let's use it. Escape, and then let's save it. It's still gonna run. Thousand. Okay, awesome. So it's running here, and then let's now that we have learned about variables and get requests, now let's try to do something called post request. So there are two ways to do this. The first way here is, so within the app.route decorator, I do a comma, so like another parameter. In the other parameter, I just do methods. Okay, so I'm basically telling it what methods I want this function to handle. So in this case, let's do get and post. Okay, so this says that if the user does a get or a post request to this route, please run the hello world function. And now let's test it. Get to the index route. See, awesome, it's running. Now let's try to do a post request since we asked it to handle that, and this is running as well. We can, of course, we can apply conditions here to check if the user has done a get request or a post request. So I'm gonna do here. Before that, we need to import another function called request. So now we have access to request data, and then here what I'm gonna do is in request data, now that we have request data, let's now do a little console.log request.method. sorry, this is not JavaScript. Print request.method, and then let's see if it runs fine. If I do a post, yeah, you can see it's getting me the data I need. So since this is a variable, I can use an if or an else. So if request.method, let's say if it was a get, so then I do return or yeah, let's send a JSON object message. This was a get request. Now since if it wasn't the get request, it would be a post request, so I just do return message this was a post request. Okay, so now let's see if our code is working fine. So get request is being done here. This was the get request. Awesome, it runs. Let's now check if the post request, yeah, so the post request works as well. There is another method of doing it, and this is what I personally prefer, and that makes the code look cleaner. So instead of using this, I'll just delete it, and then here I just do app.get. So basically just handle just the get request, and then here I can add at app.post, which is another decorator or another function. So if the user does a post to this URL, they're gonna use this function. So return, and then message this was a post request. I'm gonna save it, and then I'm gonna remove all of this user's code now. I'm gonna remove it here. I'm gonna make my indentations consistent, and now let's save it and then run it. So get request again. This was a get request. Does it run here? This was a post request. Awesome, it runs fine and well. Okay, and another big thing that I want to cover here is called templates. So what are templates basically? Let's say if I want to send a HTML h1, and then this is a piece of text rendered by the server. H1 again, and let's run it in my browser. Let's save, rendered by the server, and then let's say I want to make it look nicer. Basically I want to add styles in my HTML. So style, then h1. I'm gonna add more h1 size. You can see this is a problem, right? My code becomes more and more convoluted. It becomes less readable. It becomes basically really bad, and we want to prevent this. Okay, so a better way to render HTML from the server is to use templates. So let's create a template here. So in your Python project folder, what you need to do is you need to create an empty folder, an empty directory, and then you will call it template. So Flask will automatically look for your HTML files here. This is where you want to write your HTML files. So for example, I want to do hello.html. Hello.html is here, and then let's write some code here. So for example, let's create HTML, and then title, and then let's do hello here, and then h1. This was a piece of text rendered by the server. And then how do we use this? So you just go to your main.py file again, and then since this is the index, you are going to render it here. So you need to import something called render template, and then let's use the render template here. So the name of our file is hello.html. Yeah, let's see if it runs. Awesome. So it's running fine. So let's say I make a little change here. This is simple HTML. Instead of hello, I just do goodbye. Awesome. So it's running as well. And then what we're gonna do is, let's say you have a variable here. To render a variable onto your template, let's say I want to do it in the ID, and I'm just gonna create another HTML file. I'm just gonna say ID display.html, and then I'm gonna basically do the same thing. I'm gonna do HTML, but now since I want to render a variable onto the client, this is where we need to do something a little bit different. So in my h1 I'm going to do ID that we detected was, and then this is how I render my variable. What I'm going to do is two curly brackets again, and then my ID. This is my ID. So now how do I use it? I go here, change this code, render template. Now now that I want to render my template, which template do I want to render? To render ID display.html, and then I'm gonna pass my variable like this, is ID is equals to ID. That's it. So now let's see if it works. I'm gonna wait for my code to save, and then let's see. 1000. Yeah, it runs well. 500. So now let's do something called status codes. So in status codes, let's say if the user or if the backend wants to find a specific resource but it couldn't find it, so in that case you would show off something like an error 404, or if the request went through and was okay, you do something called an error 200, not an error, status code 200. Okay, so this is how we send it. So for example, let's say if the user is here in this URL, they're gonna see something like error, or sorry, 200, and let's see if it works. Sorry, it shouldn't be here. Awesome. So it works. And let's say if they want to render an error or here, right? So the post method, let's say we want to show an error 500, then say something like this method has not been implemented yet. So let's see if it works. So if the user goes to the post, if the user posts to the index directory, they should be seeing this message, and then the status code should be 500. Let's do a post. Awesome. So everything works fine. Yeah, so this was all for today. If you have any questions, let me know. And thank you so much for watching, guys. Have a great day. Bye bye.